The Hunter x Hunter iceberg goes even deeper than you thought. To be honest, it goes even deeper than I thought. When I first started putting all of this together, I thought this was just going to be like a fun compilation of weird facts. But the depth of this world is so ridiculous, and we are going to start with something that blew my mind. Quite literally, if you could, because it's Genthru, the antagonist best remembered as the one everyone forgets. But did you know that Genthru's very existence was foreshadowing a massive part of the Chimera Ant arc? Specifically with his Nen ability Little Flower, which allows Genthru to create small bomb detonations within the palm of his hand, which is very similar both in name and effect to the miniature rose used by Isaac Netero against Meruem, but also used by warring nations all over the world. The miniature rose was banned, but it was still a very common and easy to use weapon. So the history here is that at some stage in his life, Genthru witnessed the detonation of a miniature rose, and he was so enamored with its beauty and destruction that he came up with his own pocket version of it and named it Little Flower. Sort of like going to the Eiffel Tower and then buying a smaller, shittier Eiffel Tower from one of the various scam artists on the street. Don't buy those. Don't encourage them. But on the topic of landmarks, let's head to Dubai, specifically the Burj Khalifa, a building which should look very familiar because it is the spitting image of Heaven's Arena. Did you know that the Burj Khalifa was actually the inspiration for Heaven's Arena? If so, you're wrong, and we're going to unlearn that right now, because the truth is even stranger. Despite often being credited as the design inspiration by very terribly put together online facts lists, Heaven's Arena actually predates the Burj Khalifa by half a decade, with Togashi first penning the building in 1999 and construction in Dubai commencing in 2004. And all I'm saying is, whichever prince was in charge of this project, they might have been a big fan of fictional hunters. Oh, and in case you're wondering which is taller, the Burj Khalifa stands at 830 meters tall, whilst Heaven's Arena is a mighty 991 meters tall. So that is score 1 for Togashi and 0 for the nation of Dubai. Your move, Dubai. Meanwhile, for those of you keeping score in Goongi, you'll have noticed a simply mind-blowing piece of information regarding Meruem and Komugi's games. That information being that their Goongi matches basically tell us the entire palace invasion story before it happens. And it's all due to the Kokoriko strategy. This was a play independently thought up by Meruem, which had previously been invented by Komugi. The idea of which is to separate the king from the other pieces and then mercilessly destroy said king, thus winning the game match, which is exactly the same strategy used by Netero and the extermination team to deal with Meruem. That is how Meruem perfectly understood Netero's intentions, because he'd already seen and used it himself in Goongi. But it goes much deeper than that. Whilst playing, Komugi actually comes up with a counter to Kokoriko, thus saving her king. And so during the palace invasion, Meruem was also saved after Kokoriko was used on him. The games that Meruem and Komugi had previously played are governing this entire series of events. So here's where things get slightly complicated and incredibly tragic. Later on, Komugi uses Kokoriko against Meruem, who plays the counter strategy, but then Komugi develops a counter strategy, thus ensuring the demise of the king to Kokoriko once more. And this is exactly what happened in the palace invasion. Meruem countered the miniature rose by absorbing his royal guards, giving them various strange anti-orgasms, but that in turn was countered by the poison of the poor man's rose. And there is so much more Goongi symbolism in this arc, so much that it would need an entire video of its own to explain it all, but these scenes are far from random. Every single move by every single piece in Goongi is something that Togashi painstakingly thought about. Now, did I hear somebody say sex doll? No? Well, we're going to talk about it anyway. Mr. Miliki Zoldyck is probably the least developed of the siblings. However, if there's one thing that absolutely cannot be ignored, it is the life-size anime girl doll in his room. Actually, to be fair, I suppose it's only an anime girl to us because Hunter x Hunter is an anime. To Miliki, it's just a regular girl. Now, what most people tend to focus on is the standing upright girl, the one with a skirt shorter than Leorio's temper. However, I would actually like to draw everyone's attention to the other doll sitting a bit more hidden away in the corner there. The one more blatantly, how shall we say, adult-oriented. And just in case there was any doubt as to the purpose of these dolls, then just bear in mind that they appear in chapter number 69. Now that's what I call a real snake in the shower. Wait, no it's not. But this is. In the 1999 anime, we are, I'm going to use the word treated, to a wide variety of bathing scenes during the Hunter exam, one of which is Ponzu, and she had a special guest, being one of Bourbon's snakes. I actually think this bit of filler is pretty brilliant because it gives a nice comic setup to the eventual tragedy, which is of course when Ponzu and Bourbon get trapped in a cave, with Bourbon being killed by Ponzu's bees and Ponzu being unable to leave due to Bourbon's snakes. Sometimes the 1999 anime was really good at setting up stuff like this, but at other times, it was just weird. Such as the notorious case of Gon's mini boat from episode 1, because while in the manga and in the 2011 anime, Gon boards a larger transport vessel to leave Whale Island, in the 1999 anime, they elected to have him depart the island on this teeny tiny boat, good thing, which is an absolutely mind-boggling decision to look at in isolation. It's just such an unnecessary change. However, the reason why they do this is because of episode 2. Like all incredibly strong story-driven anime, Hunter x Hunter immediately dives into a filler episode for its second outing, which involves Gon sailing to a new island in order to leave his small boat to board a bigger boat. Saying it out loud, it actually sounds a lot like One Piece, especially since Gon's mini boat strongly evolves those Baratie Mihawk vibes. But in this filler episode, they rewrite the story of how Gon meets Leorio, who is also on the island, and then it goes on to flirt with some darker aspects of Hunter x Hunter, as Gon is almost abducted by an implied pedophile. Gon's bugging Leorio to tell him where the ship is. Leorio's just like, he's having none of it. And then this guy with the dodgy mustache just comes out of nowhere, and he's like, come with me, little boy, I'll tell you where the ship is. And then he takes Gon by the hand, Leorio gives him a bit of a thwack, and a very uncomfortable scene comes to an end. But basically, that is why Gon's mini boat exists, because we needed that Leorio filler episode where Gon was almost abducted by a strange man in a van. So the moral of the story is, don't trust strangers, unless it's Leorio, who was also a stranger at the time. But also, don't trust Hunter x Hunter data books. If you're unaware, these are standard publications for all long-running shonen series that compile information about the characters, the world, and expand on all of them in generally insightful ways. For example, the One Piece data books tell you almost as much about the story as the actual series does, whereas the Hunter x Hunter data books primarily exist to confuse. The issue is that these are not written by Togashi himself, so they often go on to contradict the series. For example, both Zeno and Silver Zoldyck are traditionally thought of as transmuters, and that's because that's what the data book said they were. However, this was directly contradicted by Togashi himself, who stated that they were emitters. And then there's the names. My God, the names. In the data book, Kurapika's name is officially spelt as Karapikt, Uvagin's name is spelt Werbergreen, and my personal favorite, Crawler Lucifer, whose official name, according to the data book, and I want you all to refer to him as this from now on, is Kulroth Lucifer. Not even Machi's name is safe, having been spelt Mighty Call Mighty Net. Anyway, speaking of Machi not being safe, weird thing now, she is actually supposed to be dead. Very, very dead. In the extra comments of volume 36, Togashi expands heavily on the aftermath of Chrollo vs Hisoka, and his wording here is quite interesting. What I wanted to do most was have him being Hisoka, kill someone in the troop. I knew how the story was going to work out, but I hadn't decided who Hisoka would kill at the end. Hisoka wanted to kill Machi then and there, but I vetoed it. Which, firstly, it's a very interesting way of talking about your story, as if Togashi is having an actual discussion with one of his characters. He knew what Hisoka wanted, but Togashi, as some sort of supreme storytelling man, kind of blueballed Hisoka again because, and I quote, "It was my hunch that letting Machi stick around would make it much more interesting for later on. So for all intents and purposes, Machi should be dead." But Togashi had a feeling deep within his narrative loins. And now Machi is still alive for a reason that he may or may not have decided yet. And the unknown decisions don't stop there, because one of the biggest legacy mysteries of Hunter x Hunter has always been the two missing members of the Phantom Troop. The troop, when fully formed, consists of 13 people, each numbered from 0 to 12. And the makeup of the troop, look, it's changed pretty significantly over the course of the series, but we have never actually seen the full 13. Sorry, I should say, we have never actually seen the original full 13. By which I'm talking about number 8, a member stated to have been killed by Silver Zoldyck, and number 4, a member whose spot was usurped by Hisoka. Togashi is very careful to not necessarily specify that number 4 was killed. However, when this horny battle clown is involved, I'd say that's a fair assumption. These two missing members basically only exist in a void of history, because we very recently received a Phantom Troop flashback detailing the origin story of the group in Meteor City. However, these two members were not present at that time. Meanwhile, we also know what the troop goes on to become, and it just feels like we're missing a very integral piece of this here troop puzzle. Who are these two enigmas? How did they get involved with the troop? And why was Silver Zoldyck hired to assassinate one of them? Funnily enough, all we know about this is that Silver said the money wasn't worth it, which means that whoever that number 8 was pretty damn powerful. Someone well worth knowing about in the history of this series, which we don't know about and potentially never will. Meanwhile, there is a common belief that the original number 4 is Omokage from the Phantom Rouge film. And while that is probably the better of the two Hunter x Hunter films, they're both just as non-canon, and so the true original number 4 still remains a mystery. Honestly, one of the things I really want from Hunter x Hunter before Togashi inevitably ends it for good is just to know who these two people are. But failing that, I also really want the Greed Island game, which is a goal you can actually achieve, because Bandai did actually make a physical version version of the Greed Island card game, which came with a player's binder and an accompanying Joystation box. Getting your hands on one of these is not easy, and they're pretty damn pricey these days. But the biggest problem is that owning the cards doesn't actually allow you to play the Greed Island game in any way, shape, or form, because that's just not possible. Probably for the best when you consider that it has cards like Pregnancy Stone, but you're essentially buying a glorified prop, but it's still pretty damn cool. Meanwhile, in world, Greed Island holds one of the greatest meta mysteries in Hunter x Hunter, because every now and then in the series, you'll notice an object or location featuring these almost alien-like inscriptions. The box Jing left for Gon, for example, was sealed with multiple sticks covered with these inscriptions. This is such a criminally underexplored aspect of Hunter x Hunter, but these are specific codes designed to enhance Nen when applied to an object. And you can find examples of inscriptions being used absolutely everywhere. At its earliest point, Wing used inscription on the strings tied around Gon's finger, programming the string to break if Gon used 10. Meanwhile, the handcuffs Nov uses to remain bound to his hide-and-seek key also have inscription applied. And in the more modern day, the Hunter Association have applied another set of handcuffs to be on Netero featuring inscription, which I imagine is really the only possible way to detain Nen users without using an actual ability. But inscription gets a lot crazier than that, because these are all sort of fun utility uses so far. Basically, program Nen code into object for desired effect. But the entirety of Greed Island operates from a central hub of inscription. The whole opening room is absolutely slathered in Nen programming to ensure the day-to-day operations of the island, a feat that we've recently seen equaled by King Nasabi's burial chamber, an absurdly massive room featuring 14 coffins for 14 corpses. And when these coffins are finally all filled, what we are going to witness is likely one of the grandest scale extreme uses of Nen that we have ever seen in the series, because these patterns are not random. It's programming language understood by only those at the very heights of Nen use. We as readers haven't even begun to comprehend the depth of what's happening here, and in fact what's been happening in the world all along. But with that said, Nen inscription isn't even the most secret Nen language in the series. There is an even more hidden and potentially even more powerful script that we've already seen in the story, which I'm going to showcase in the next video, because we are still nowhere near the true depths of this iceberg.